Welcome back to another episode of Murder, Mysteries, and More. My name's Kaylee.
My name is Desi.
Don't forget to like and subscribe. Don't forget to hit the bell next to the subscribe button to turn on post notifications. Before we get into this case, we always encourage those who have useful information for any unsolved case to please report it to your local police and sheriff department.
April 1585, hundreds would venture out to North Carolina's coastal coast to establish a new colony on Roanoke. However, the first attempt was unsuccessful due to severe lack of food and tense relations between the natives. In 1585, John White was determined to go back with men and women to form a new colony on Roanoke. However, these supplies ran out quickly, and due to tense relations between the Spanish, he could not return. 3 years later, he came back only to find the colony vanished without a trace. What exactly happened to the lost colony on Roanoke Island?
Little background history. In 1584, two ships voyaged across the Atlantic Ocean, and they were scouting for a place to establish the first English colony in North America. Mid-July 1584, the ships came across the North Carolina Barrier Islands, which are known as the Outer Banks. The English made acquaintances with Native Americans, and the Native Americans invited them to Roanoke Island. 1 month later, the ships sailed back to England. September 1584, Sir Walter Raleigh made plans to establish a colony somewhere along the Outer Banks. His plan was to name the land Virginia after the Virgin Queen. April 1585, a fleet of 7 ships carrying about 600 men and roughly a year's worth of supplies departed from England. June 1585, the fleet ships reached the Outer Banks, but something went horribly wrong. One of the flagships was passing through a shallow inlet when it struck a shoal. This caused the ship to take damage, and unfortunately, the ship was carrying most of the supplies, so all those supplies that they were going to use to sustain their colony were completely gone into the ocean. And due to this, they decided to send some of the ships back because there was just not enough supplies for all 600 men.
100 men were stationed at Roanoke Island. The Native Americans approved construction of the Roanoke colony. The island Roanoke was chosen because of its accessibility to the ocean while hidden from Spanish patrols. At this time, Spain had already claimed most of Virginia. Before winter, England was supposed to send more supplies to sustain the colony, but that didn't happen because the Queen was more worried about issues back in England. The colony eventually ran out of supplies, which was obviously not good. Thankfully, generous natives were willing to share food with the colonists. Over time, natives struggled to meet supply and demand, which tensions would begin to rise between colonists and natives. Every time a group of colonists would visit a Native American village, many of the inhabitants would collapse and die. Natives at the time believed that the Englishmen would hurt them with invisible bullets. But as we know, the English were carrying deadly diseases which many of the natives did not have a cure for, nor did they have the immune system to deal with these deadly diseases, which resulted in multiple epidemics breaking out.
The two leaders of Roanoke Island were Colonial Governor Ralph Lane and Indian Chief Wingina. Tensions did increase between the two, and they became wary of each other. Wingina thought it was best to move his people back to the mainland. Lane thought Wingina had formed an alliance with other tribes, and he thought that they were plotting an attack against the colony. June 15, 1586, Lane took his men to the mainland and brutally killed the natives. Unfortunately, Wingina was decapitated, and they placed his head outside of the fort of the colony, which was horrendous. 1 week later, Sir Francis Drake commanded a fleet of English ships, and they stopped by the Outer Banks. Considering the violent attacks and the tension between the natives and colonists, it was in their best interest to abandon the colony. Colonists were evacuated, and roughly 9 months later, all of them except for 3 of the men returned back to England. Despite the tensions between the natives and colonists and the severe lack of food and no treasure found, one man by the name John White was fascinated by Roanoke. John White was a painter and an artist. It is unclear whether White was a part of the 1584 expedition. However, he did participate in the voyage of 1585.
His name is not in the list of surviving colonists, but some historians believe he was a part of the colony. Sir Walter Raleigh was convinced to go back to Roanoke for a second time by White and others. The second voyage was to include both women and children, and not just men. This included his pregnant daughter, Eleanor Dare. Not much funding was provided for this voyage, so only 3 ships would go and venture out, and White would command these ships and serve as governor of the colony. Spring 1587, they departed England and headed back to Roanoke. Within the first month at Roanoke, there were attacks from natives. The colonists wanted White to go back to England to get more supplies for them. August 15, 1987, White would go back to England to gather more supplies. He didn't want to leave the island alone, so he left behind 115 colonists, including mostly men, some women, and a few children. His daughter, Eleanor, was left behind with her newborn Virginia, the first baby born in America to English parents.
White's timing going back to England was not great. He went during high tensions between England and Spain. So because of that, he was not able to return to Roanoke for another 3 years. So he left behind all 115 people without any supplies, including his daughter. August 1590, White returned back to Roanoke, but something was wrong. The entire colony was nowhere to be seen. There was no trace of any evidence of where they went, except for one thing. The word Croatoan was etched into a fence post, and Crow was also carved into a tree. White attempted twice to sail 50 miles south of Roanoke to Croatoan Island. Today, it's known as Hatteras Island. Unfortunately, due to bad storms, he would have to turn back each time. The ship he was also using at the time was a private ship, so he couldn't venture out for a third time to look for the lost colony. White went back to Europe, and he later on moved to Ireland. In 1593, he passed away. Still to this day, all 115 colonists, plus the 3 from the first failed colonization attempt, were never found. And there is no evidence of where these people went.
So, what happened to them, you ask? Well, there are a couple theories as to what happened. And the first theory is that a local Native American tribe massacred the entire colony, which is very possible, you know.
It is.
They hated white people, but it's pretty fair. We know that between 1585 to 1586, a group of Englishmen attempted to colonize the land, but they were unsuccessful. Tensions did arise between the natives and colonists, and the previous colony had to leave because of violent attacks between both sides. Lane also made tensions worse because he killed the chief of the local tribe, which is a big no-no.
Yeah, major no.
Like, you're just gonna make it worse, but okay, that's cool. He was way too suspicious of the natives, and no wonder they didn't get along with the colonists. But no mass grave sites have been found, so we cannot confirm that this actually did happen, but it's still very possible that this happened.
The second theory, the settlers joined a nearby native tribe. In 1584, a native Mantino traveled to England. He also made another trip between Roanoke expeditions. He sailed with John White and began friendly relations with the colonists. John White wanted Mantino to become the chief of both Roanoke and the Croatoan tribes. Mantino, though, had difficulty controlling the Roanoke tribe, So he decided to go back with his people, which he was a part of the Croatoan tribe. It is theorized that he possibly took the colonists back to Croatoan since Roanoke Island was dangerous for them. 1888-54, Croatoan natives did ask for aid and stated that they were a part of the lost colony. It is also noted that some of the natives did have gray-colored eyes and possible European DNA. 2015, archaeologists did find European objects on the Hatteras Island. Some of these objects included broken bowls, hilt of iron rapier sword, writing tablet made of slate. The rapier sword was from the 16th century, and hilt would be used by an Englishman of high standing. This theory would explain the carving in the fence post-Croatoan, because it would mean that's where they're at, on the Croatoan island.
True. Theory number 3 is the Croatoans moved inland. Between the years 1585 and 1593, he painted a detailed watercolor map called the La Virginia Pars. The map includes the North Carolina coast, including both Roanoke and Croatoan Island. Historians describe the map as extremely accurate and descriptive. Museum experts say the most carefully detailed piece of cartography of any part of North America to be made in the 16th century. His map, compared to most modern-day maps, contain no differences except those caused by the natural changes of the coastline. 2012, a non-profit organization known as the First Colony Foundation asked the British Museum to re-examine 2 patches on his map. The museum used advanced technology. They determined that a smaller patch covered a tiny blue point star. The British Museum report says, while the detailed interpretation of the symbol is beyond the scope of the study and is best left to experts in the field, it seems certain to represent a fort or fortification.
This star may indicate that on the western side of the Amberley Sound, there was a fort inland from Roanoke Island. This would be where the lost colonists resided. There was also another patch on the map. It had light markings of stars. The museum does state that the markings have faded over time, and here's what they say, quote unquote. One other possible explanation, if rather romantic explanation, is that these lines could reflect the use of an invisible ink, end quote. So this ink could only be revealed by using heat. It is possible that John White did not want to reveal this fort, but that is kind of strange because why would he intend on hiding this? One plausible explanation why he wanted to hide this from them is that he did not want the English to find out and spy on him. John White back home in England did make a non-specific reference to an area inland from Roanoke. European objects have been found in this area, including Surrey, Hampshire borderware, and that is a type of ceramic that was discontinued in 1624. Aglets were also found. Aglets are copper tubes that were used to secure wool fibers in the beginning of the 17th century.
Other possible theories include deadly diseases that wiped them out, which would make sense, of course, because if a new disease broke out and the colony didn't have immunity to it, this could result in their deaths. But again, no bodies were found. There are many religious and supernatural beliefs among the Native Americans. In Native culture, there is a beast known as the Wendigo. Natives believe that those who participate in cannibalism are doing so because their bodies are taken over by the creature. If this is true, they are still alive, but in the form of Wendigos. Another spiritual explanation is that there was a spirit of this island that if this spirit was angered, it would turn people into part of the landscape. If the colonists hoarded up the resources and did not share with the natives, this would have angered the spirit. Natives also believe in the reptilian devil of the woods. This is an evil spirit / demon that attaches itself to people. It is believed that possibly the spirit attached itself to the colonists because they turned against one another. The spirit causes greed, violence, and paranoia.
Dare stones. Somewhere between 1937 and 1940, stones were found, and they are believed to tell the story of what happened to the lost colony. They are also believed to be written by White's daughter, Eleanor Dare. Most historians do believe that these stones are faked, except for most historians believe the very first stone that they found is truly authentic. In 1937, a tourist brought an inscribed stone to Emory University to be inspected by Dr. Haywood Pierce. But the inscription was consistent with the phrasing, and they would have had to use a tool to carve the message. This is what it said. Ananias Dare and Virginia went hence unto heaven, 1591. And I, Englishman John White, governor via. Basically stating that Eleanor's husband passed along with her daughter and whomever had the stone to tell her father. On the other side of the stone, it also stated 7 colonists who were still alive. And it also mentioned all the natives were killed and was signed by Eleanor. 47 other stones were found, but archaeologists found that the other stones were fake. We are still unsure to this day what happened.
And into Reddit comments, which this is going to be the only Reddit comment post for this video. It is by Excalibur_Supreme Lost Colony of Roanoke discussion. Mean Magpie, it's always cracked me up. This is an unsolved mystery. I remember reading it as a kid and being like, I'm sorry, did I miss some details or something? They picked up and left mysteriously with no sign of conflict, and ooh, they just happened to carve the name of a native tribe and a tree. What does it mean? It's really obvious to me that they just integrated with the Croatoan tribe. There's no mystery about it. The colonists stated it as clearly as they could with the means available to them.
Perky head witch, I like to say. I think it's pretty well known by now. They went to the Croatoan island and blended with the folks living there. Archaeological finds support this idea, as does oral history of light-skinned, blue-eyed natives. The Croatoan carvings are pretty enormous. Yeah.
Commit. I've always been fascinated by the first Dare stone found by Louis Hammond in 1937. Is it possible the colony initially joined the natives, then had a falling out? That's very possible.
Deleted. There's an episode of the podcast Supernatural about this. You should definitely listen. That's a cool podcast.
Deleted. Have you seen or heard of the Lost Colony play over on Roanoke Island? I saw it a few years ago, and from what I remember, most of the play was about how they were fighting the Native Americans. In my opinion, the settlers probably went to live with their neighbors in order to avoid being completely wiped out the face of the earth, which would be smart.
Yeah. Army Lifear. If you Google it, Mo, you'll find the Lost Colony was found. They were adopted by and eventually assimilated by the local friendly tribes. They have now actual evidence of both peoples living together. Lizzie Kitty 86. At first I thought you said meow, so I just wanted a quick meow back. I thought you said that too.
Indoor barn cat. Genealogy DNA data could eventually solve this mystery if the descendants are in the US. It could possibly.
Possibly.
Yeah.
Committee. I've always been fascinated by the first Dare stone found by Louise Hammond in 1937. Subsequent stones were determined to be forgeries. It is possible the colony initially joined the natives that had a falling out, ?
This one, though. Feline law specialist. The podcast Supernatural had a good episode discussing how the colony may not have been lost, but rather the British dude who organized the move probably lied because he didn't want to pay taxes to the crown on profits from the venture. It's just a good old time tale. People don't want to pay taxes.
No, they don't. Still not to this day.
Oh. Why jail exist?
K Theo 64152. Sir Walter Raleigh cited Roanoke there because it was hidden behind the barrier islands. His proposal was twofold: to use that as a base to interdict the Spanish treasure galleons returning to Spain from South America, 2 to use it to find out where the first people were getting copper because English need copper to make bronze for cannons.
Interesting.
What the heck? Flash sparkles too. Airhead's white mystery. What?
What? Okay, hold on, wait. Oh my god, what is this? Did you click on the thing?
Yeah.
It says not to be a history fucker on Maine, but the whole mystery of the lost colony of Roanoke is so fucking funny. Governor of the colony, hey, I'm gonna go back to England to get more supplies. 115 colonists. Okay, governor ends up spending 3 years in England because of a naval war with Spain or some shit. Governor gets back to the colony, find everyone gone. Governor sees the word Croatoan, the name of American tribe, carved into a post. Croatoan tribe has members and children with blonde hair, blue eyes, pale skin. Everyone, what could have happened to the colonist of Roanoke? White mystery.
Okay.
Bruh. That's so funny.
That's funny.
White mystery.
I-
Another mystery.
Yeah. I know Dan Jones. Who's Dan Jones?
Who's Dan Jones? That's a good question.
The Supernatural with Ashley Flowers podcast did an episode with a few modern theories. I just have to give a disclaimer that the podcast walks back and forth between the line, here's the facts, and here's some completely unfounded theories that are fun to talk about. It's not exactly RBI worthy source material, but it's fun to listen. The aliens.
Always the aliens.
Yep.
Somebody's always fucking with aliens, bro. I like this one person's name. It's Old French Whore.
Oh my gosh. Delete it. I just want to say that Lemino's video on the subject was fascinating as hell. Yeah, I watched that. That was a good video.
Definitely. Very, very
BuzzFeed did a good one too.
They did do a very good one. I did like theirs a lot. Yeah. My third dumb name. Where's racism in the story? Everywhere.
Yeah,
Everywhere in the story. It's everywhere. Oops.
Error _Evan _not _ Yeah, it's really not mystery per se, just historic white folks not wanting to admit that they joined a native tribe and stuff. At least that's what I gathered.
Yeah, I get that kind of vibe too, for sure. I mean, they were just, I guess, ashamed of joining Native Americans.
Which is sad.
Very sad because they're just people, man. Just because they live differently and talk differently and their skin's different don't mean shit. They got human parts.
Mantio, he seemed like a cool guy.
Yeah, like a cool guy.
Yeah, he got along with the colonists pretty well and he showed them everywhere.
Which is good though, because I'm sure they would have been lost as fuck.
Probably.
Yeah, be like, how do I get back here? Oh.
After a failed attempt to colonize Roanoke in 1585, the English thought it was a bright idea to go back. John White was determined to bring the colonists and form relations with the natives, but upon leaving to get more supplies and not be able to return 3 years later, he came back to the colonists being completely gone. Whether a nasty communicable disease, violent relations, some evil spirit, or they had mixed children with the natives, we do not know what happened to the lost colony of the Roanoke.
Thank you for listening to another episode of Murders, Mysteries, and More. Remember to always keep your eyes open because the lost colony may still be out there.